The case was closed without a recovery. The climber did not return. No remains were located. The only item later confirmed was a backpack. It was found intact, zippers closed, contents dry. The location was the San Juan Mountains of southern Colorado, above the tree line, above the last known camp. The backpack was discovered more than 2,000 feet higher than expected. There was no established route to that shelf. No anchors, no rope marks, no disturbance in the snow. Search teams could not account for how it reached that elevation. The report lists the cause as unresolved. The record ends there. San Juan File, 2009. The San Juan Mountains rise along the southern edge of Colorado's high country, a maze of granite ridges and ice-carved bowls that stretch across more than 3,000 square miles. The peaks here break 14,000 feet regularly. In winter, they're buried under layers of snow that don't fully melt until late June. In summer, afternoon thunderstorms roll in without warning, turning exposed ridges into lightning corridors. The range sits far from major highways, isolated by distance and terrain. The nearest town with year-round access is a 2-hour drive on unpaved roads that wash out in spring. Cell signals don't reach most of the backcountry. Satellite phones are standard equipment for anyone planning to stay more than a day. The area attracts technical climbers, people who come for the challenge of routes that require ropes and anchors and careful planning. Most of the peaks have established trails to certain elevations, but above 12,000 feet, the landscape becomes less predictable. Rock faces shed loose stone without warning. Snow bridges collapse over hidden crevasses. Weather systems move faster than forecasts can track them. Search and rescue teams in the region log dozens of calls each season. Most are resolved within 48 hours. Some are not resolved at all. The wilderness here doesn't give up its secrets easily. When someone goes missing above the tree line, the search area expands into hundreds of acres of vertical terrain, places where a body can be buried under rockfall or snow and remain hidden for decades. It's not uncommon, it's simply the nature of the environment. The file was logged on March 14, 2009. It came from a ranger station on the western edge of the San Juan Range, submitted as part of a standard incident report. The document itself is brief, less than 4 pages, but it references a longer series of entries kept by the missing individual in the weeks before the incident. Those entries were recovered later. They were stored in a weather-resistant notebook inside a backpack that was found 6 months after the man disappeared. The notebook had been kept as a climbing log. It recorded route conditions, gear notes, weather patterns. Standard practice for solo climbers working unfamiliar terrain. What follows are selected excerpts from the log, reproduced here without alteration. The entries begin in late February. February 26, 2009, 7:15 a.m. Started the approach to the west face at first light, temperature holding steady around 18 degrees, clear skies, no wind to speak of. Snow coverage is heavier than expected for this time of year, but the base feels stable, no signs of recent avalanche activity on the lower slopes. I'm planning to establish a base camp around 11,000 feet and spend the next few days scouting the upper routes. The ridge system looks accessible from the South Col, though I'll need to reassess once I'm higher up. Gear is holding up well. No issues with the stove or tent setup. I passed 2 other groups on the lower trail yesterday, both heading out. No one else is planning to stay in this sector for the next week. According to the ranger I spoke with at the trailhead, that suits me fine. I prefer working alone on technical routes. Fewer variables to manage. The solitude up here is part of the appeal. No radio chatter, no headlamps sweeping across camp at odd hours. Just the wind and the cold and the work. I'll check in again tomorrow once I've settled into a routine. March 3rd, 2009, 6:40 a.m. Weather turned overnight. Woke to about 8 inches of fresh powder and low visibility. I stayed in the tent until noon, waiting for the cloud cover to lift. It didn't. Spent the afternoon securing the site and reviewing my maps. The upper ridge is still the most logical route to the summit, but the new snow will add at least a day to the timeline. I'm not concerned. I have enough supplies for another 10 days if needed. The cold is sharper than it was last week. Last night dropped into the single digits, and the wind picked up after midnight. I could hear it moving through the rocks above camp. A low, steady sound that didn't stop until dawn. It's strange how sound carries differently up here. Sometimes I hear rockfall from miles away, clear as if it's happening just outside the tent. Other times, the silence is so complete, it feels like the whole range is holding its breath. This morning, I noticed something odd while refilling my water supply from the melt stream near camp. There were tracks in the snow along the embankment. Not animal tracks exactly. They didn't follow any pattern I recognized. The spacing was irregular, and the depth varied in a way that didn't match the terrain. I followed them for about 50 yards before they disappeared into a section of exposed rock. Could have been a deer or elk moving through during the storm, though the shape didn't quite fit. I'll keep an eye out over the next few days. It's probably nothing. Just the way the snow settled after the wind. But it's worth noting. March the 6th, 2009, 5:50 a.m. The tracks appeared again, this time closer to camp, within 20 feet of the tent. I didn't hear anything during the night, but when I stepped outside at dawn, they were there in the fresh snow that had fallen after midnight. The same irregular pattern, the same inconsistent depth. I took measurements this time. The stride length varies between 4 and 7 feet, which doesn't match any animal I know of in this range. The impressions themselves are shallow in some places, deep in others, even though the snow consistency is uniform across the area. I followed them again. They led upslope toward the ridge, then stopped abruptly at a section of bare granite. No continuation on the other side, no marks on the rock surface. It's possible the wind is playing tricks, redistributing snow in ways that mimic tracks. I've seen similar effects in other high-altitude environments, but the placement feels deliberate. They circle the camp in a wide arc, then move upward, always upward. I'm not concerned for my safety. The tent is secure, my gear is accounted for, and I've seen no signs of wildlife entering the area. But the pattern is unusual enough that I'm documenting it in detail. I'll continue with the planned ascent tomorrow if the weather holds. March 9th, 2009, 7:20 p.m. I reached the ridge today. The climb took longer than expected. The upper section is more technical than it appeared from below. I had to place additional anchors and move carefully across a traverse that showed signs of recent rockfall. The view from the top is remarkable. You can see the entire valley system stretching out in all directions, peaks stacked against the horizon like broken teeth. But something happened on the descent that I can't explain. I was about 200 feet below the summit, moving down a fixed line I'd set earlier in the day. The weather was clear, visibility was perfect. I heard a sound above me, not rockfall, not wind. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical. A series of sharp clicks, evenly spaced, coming from somewhere higher on the ridge. I stopped and listened. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I waited. Nothing. I continued down, and about 10 minutes later, I saw movement on the slope above me, something large, crossing laterally across the snowfield about 300 yards upslope. I couldn't make out details. The light was flat, and the distance was too great, but the shape was wrong. It didn't move like an animal. The gait was too smooth, too fluid. It covered ground faster than anything I've seen at that elevation. I watched it for maybe 15 seconds before it disappeared behind a rock outcrop. I didn't see it again. When I reached that section of the slope an hour later, there were no tracks. The snow was undisturbed. I'm not sure what I saw. Altitude can affect perception. I know that. I've been above 11,000 feet for nearly 2 weeks, and the thin air can cause visual distortions, especially in flat light. But I've climbed at altitude before. I know what hypoxia feels like. This didn't feel like that. I'm heading back to base camp now. I'll reassess in the morning. March 11th, 2009, 4:30 a.m. I'm leaving. Something came into camp last night. I was asleep when I heard the sound. The same clicking I'd heard on the ridge, but closer, much closer. It was directly outside the tent. I didn't move. I stayed in my sleeping bag and listened. The clicking circled the tent slowly. Maybe 2 full rotations. Then it stopped. I could hear something else. A low vibration, almost below the threshold of hearing. It made my chest feel tight. The tent fabric didn't move. There was no wind. But I could feel pressure against the walls, like something was leaning against them from the outside. It lasted for maybe 5 minutes. Then it stopped. Silence. I waited until dawn to leave the tent. There were no tracks. The snow around the site was completely undisturbed. No marks, no impressions. Nothing. My gear was exactly where I'd left it. The food cache was untouched, but the tent itself. The fabric on the north side was warm, not cold like it should have been after a night in sub-zero temperatures. Warm to the touch. I can't explain that. I'm packing now. I'll be off the mountain by tomorrow. The climber's name was recorded in the incident report as Daniel Forrester. He was 42 years old at the time of the incident, an experienced alpinist with over 15 years of technical climbing experience in high-altitude environments. He had summited peaks in the Rockies, the Cascades, and the Alaska Range. He was not considered reckless. His gear was well maintained. His route planning was thorough. The official search began on March 14, 2009, after Forrester failed to check in at the scheduled date. A ranger patrol reached his base camp site on March 16th. The tent was still standing. Most of his gear was still inside. Sleeping bag, stove, food supplies. His climbing rope and harness were missing. The notebook was not found during the initial search. The search continued for 6 days. Teams covered the upper ridges, the approach routes, and the surrounding drainages. No sign of Forrester was found. No body, no equipment. The search was suspended on March 22nd due to incoming weather. There are documented explanations for most of what Forrester described. High-altitude environments create perceptual anomalies that can feel disorienting, even threatening. Hypoxia reduces oxygen flow to the brain, which can cause visual and auditory hallucinations. Climbers at extreme elevations have reported seeing figures that aren't there, hearing voices in the wind, and experiencing vivid sensations of presence. The feeling of being watched is common. The tracks Forrester described could have been wind formations. Snow deposited in layers can settle unevenly, creating patterns that resemble footprints or trails. Wind scouring across exposed surfaces can mimic movement. The clicking sound he heard could have been thermal contraction. Ice and rock expanding and contracting as temperatures shift. At high elevations, these sounds carry differently. They can seem closer than they are. The movement he saw on the ridge could have been a weather phenomenon. Lenticular clouds, ground blizzards, and localized wind patterns can create the illusion of solid shapes moving across snowfields. The human brain is wired to find patterns, to interpret ambiguous stimuli as recognizable forms. In isolation, under physical stress, that tendency becomes stronger. The warmth Forrester reported on the tent fabric could have been residual body heat. Tent materials trap warmth differently depending on condensation buildup and insulation layers. If Forrester had been moving inside the tent during the night, the fabric could have retained heat in localized areas. These are all plausible explanations. They account for most of the details in his log, but they don't account for everything. The backpack was found on September 8, 2009, 6 months after Forrester disappeared. A separate climbing party spotted it during an ascent of the same peak. It was located at an elevation of 13,200 feet, more than 2,000 feet above Forrester's last known base camp. The backpack was sitting upright on a flat section of exposed granite. It had not been buried by snow. It had not been damaged by weather. The fabric showed no signs of UV degradation, no tears, no wear from wind or precipitation. Inside, the contents were dry. The notebook was intact. A water bottle was still half full. Energy bars were still sealed in their wrappers. The location where it was found is significant. There is no established route to that elevation from Forrester's base camp. The terrain between the 2 points includes vertical rock faces, unstable scree fields, and sections that would require technical climbing equipment. Forrester's climbing rope and harness were never recovered. If he had climbed to that elevation, there would have been evidence. Anchor placements, rope marks, disturbances in the snow. There were none. The backpack was also positioned in a location that is not visible from any approach route. It sits in a recessed shelf, tucked behind a rock formation that blocks it from view unless you are standing directly beside it. The climbing party that found it only noticed it because one of their members stepped off the trail to rest. It would not have been found by accident. It would not have been found by a standard search pattern. And yet, there it was, sitting upright, undisturbed, waiting. The official report lists Daniel Forrester's disappearance as unresolved. The cause is attributed to probable climbing accident with remains unrecovered. This is standard language. It's used when the terrain makes body recovery unlikely or impossible. It doesn't mean the explanation is incomplete. It simply means the wilderness kept what it took. The backpack is stored in the ranger station archives on the western edge of the San Juan Range. It's labeled and filed alongside dozens of other incidents from the area, reports of lost hikers, failed ascents, and unexplained findings. No one has opened it in years. The notebook remains inside. The last entry is dated March 11, 2009. The pages that follow are blank.